Afternoon. Actually, it's more like evening. Hey, it's still Friday. That's the only thing that matters, right? Hey, how you doing? Mr. H here with you. It's Planet Earth. Got some history for you. We got some dinosaurs, or at least prehistoric animals this time around, and of course, football. I'm joined today by my special guest, Miss Holly Stockings Blotnick, one of our cats, and Buddy is over here on the other side. I don't know why they've shown up today. They've got some kind of request, I would imagine. But well, we'll see if they got anything to contribute to the discussion. Though it looks like Miss Holly Stockings is deciding to take a nap right next to me. So, not sure how to feel about that. Hey, you ever see this picture before? No, it's not a guy who's been banned from Walmart. Nope, that's Vladimir Lenin before he was Vladimir Lenin. Yeah, he was well, let's see, he went to University of Kazan, got thrown out there, was preaching against the czarist government, and got caught and ended up there in front of the mugshot. And despite this low part of his life in 1895, he's going to become the first premier of the Soviet Union. So, yes, anybody can rise from any stations to the highest heights of power, right? It happens anywhere. We're going to go over Soviet leaders today. I think we'll have some fun with that. So there's our first one, Vladimir Lenin. There he is. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was his real name. Ulyanov, he took the name from the city he's from, Ulyanovsk. So that's where the last name comes from. Vladimir, the name that gave him Ilyich, just the middle name. You can look at this guy. You can see that he's really intense sort of dude. If you hang out with this guy, he's all in. Say what you will about our friend Vladimir Ulyanov, aka Lenin. He's a definite, intense guy. He's always thinking about how to overthrow the government. He's a dedicated communist. He thinks it can work in Russia despite the lack of any kind of real industry, just getting started in Russia there around 1900, despite the fact that Marxism was kind of based on a, industrial model for Western Europe. But it's Russia, and he's going to make it work. Vladimir Lenin, like we said, from Ulyanovsk over there, just southwest of Moscow. He took the name Lenin in honor of the Lena River way over in Siberia, where he was exiled for several years. He could speak English, he could speak French, he could speak German. Nothing else to do in Siberia, so might as well learn some languages. Actually, he learned it in Kazan. He was thrown out of Kazan for being a subversive against the government, arrested and sent to Siberia. Geography matters a lot more than you think. All right, not only do you take the name Lenin from the Lena River, look where that is. Right, it's way out there. Even by Siberian standards, it's way out there. Take the name Lenin from Lena River, and Ulyanovsk is over there southwest of Moscow. Why is that important? Because that is the traditional home for revolution in Russia. That's where the Cossacks are. Pukachev's rebellion, all that kind of stuff happens always to the southwest of Moscow. It's their version of the Wild West, or I guess the Wild East, right? So, Cossacks and all kinds of crazy stuff going on down there. If you're looking for Butch Cassidy, a Sundance Kid in Russia, that's probably the place they're going to hang out, along with Billy the Kid, all that kind of stuff. So geography matters a lot. He grew up in this kind of revolutionary environment and decides to name himself in a place he got exiled to. Like the Lena River. Eventually I let him go. Was that a big mistake? Long story short, the Russian Revolution comes along because Russia fought in the First World War and lost. Tsar Nicholas II made the stupid mistake of continuing to fight the war. He was actually overthrown in February of 1917 by Nikolai Kerensky, and they tried to establish a sort of democracy. And that didn't work because had it worked, they wouldn't have stormed the Winter Palace. Communist, or shall I say Bolshevik takeover, we're just going to call them communist, because Kerensky made the same mistake the Tsar did, trying to continue fighting the First World War. Nobody in Russia wanted to keep fighting this thing. They had we made a commitment, we have to stick with it to the Allies, and the Bolsheviks, aka communists, simply said, land, peace, bread. They'd walk around in the crowds, people saying, land, peace, bread. That's everything they want. They want out of the war, get their own land, be nice not to starve to death. It's a very compelling argument to get out of the First World War. No one knows what communism is exactly, including, half the people claim to be communists. But November the 7th, 1917, boom, they stormed the Winter Palace. Tsar Nicholas had been out of power for several months. The quasi-democratic government kind of kept him under house arrest. But, it's still a nice tourist attraction there, the throne and everything. November 7, 1917, welcome to communism. And this is basically the beginning of the Soviet Union, though the Soviet Union was officially established in 1922, as people like to point out. Yeah, it's basically there already. Alrighty, Lenin's running the show from 1917, November 7, to 1923 or 1924, depending who you ask. What's with the slash there? In 1923, he had a stroke, a debilitating stroke. A lot of that going on in the 20s. Same thing with Woodrow Wilson. So he had this debilitating stroke, and the country is kind of being run by committee. He ends up dying in 1924 and doesn't quite get around to naming a successor. You see, that's kind of important because you got to have your backup guy just in case something happens, and something happened. Who is that successor going to be? Well, over there we got Joseph Stalin on the right and Leon Trotsky over on the left. Which one of these guys do you think everyone favors? Lenin did not like Stalin. Despite all the propaganda, he wasn't really a big fan of Stalin because he figured Stalin was nuts. Yeah, it wasn't really off on that. But it's not like Trotsky was that great either, Stalin, his biggest strength was that he did the stuff nobody else wanted to do. Took care of all the paperwork and all the inspections and everything. And he was a believer that since Russia had just come out of a lost First War and the Civil War, it'd be a good idea to stay back and build what he called socialism in one country before exporting his revolution outward. Trotsky just wanted to, who founded the Red Army, by the way, wanted to take that army and start invading everything and everywhere that he could possibly see on the map. He wanted to export the revolution now. Russia is not in a position to do so, but he figures he can make it work. See, there he is. There's Joe Stalin. Not allowed back in sheets. Well, would you believe it or not? First of all, he's not even Russian. He's actually born in Georgia. No, not Atlanta. Georgia over in the Caucasus. He went to a seminary school. Yeah, they wanted this guy to be a priest. He was thrown out for radicalism. It was a big surprise. Hanging out with Lenin and company, so he did his time in the Gulag as well. There's Joe Stalin. He likes this picture a little bit better there, a little more distinguished. Got the mustache. Really nice hair, you got to admit. Got the uniform, got his little medal there, and, funny how he doesn't have any other medals. But, hey, he's the guy running the show, so he doesn't need any medals. Joe Stalin becomes the leader in 1927. See that gap, 1924 to 1927? You had to run in the country by committee. They keep having votes for the next guy to be in charge, and neither Stalin or Trotsky can gain the majority. Stalin finally gets it by getting the KGB, or that, the OGPU and the VCheck, what they called it back then, was going to call it the KGB, on his side, and boom, he becomes the leader. Trotsky gets exiled. They talk all kinds of smack on Trotsky. They finally catch up to Trotsky in 1940 in Mexico, and they put a pickaxe to his head. Yeah, so much for a graceful retirement, though. But Joe Stalin's going to be around for a very long time. Only two people ever told Stalin to his face he was wrong and lived. As you guessed, Stalin, very much a dictator. What he says goes. Tortured the kulaks down in Ukraine, destroyed farming down there, started a famine, lots of people going to the gulags. He sent more people to the gulags than the Tsar ever sent. So very much dictatorial and not a user-friendly kind of guy. But these two people looked Stalin right in the face and told him he was wrong and lived through it. The guy over there on the left is Molotov, the foreign minister, and the number 2 guy in the Soviet Union in case something ever happened to Stalin, so he did his homework. The reason he told him not to trust Hitler. They signed a non-aggression treaty in 1939, and he said one day Hitler's going to come around to stab you. Stalin didn't think it would happen, at least not immediately. Molotov saw it coming, warned him, and Stalin didn't listen, and we know everything that happened from there. The reason he was still alive is because, he was right, and he didn't do it publicly, and he had absolutely no ambitions of becoming the number 1 guy in the Soviet Union. He was number 2 because he had to. Had something happened to Stalin earlier, and they put somebody else in charge, Molotov was fine being foreign minister. The other guy over there on the right with all the medals is Zhukov. Yeah, the greatest general in the Soviet military. He looked Stalin in the eyes right when the Germans were beating on the door in Moscow, and said, we push them back. And then Stalin said in the spring, we keep pushing them back. He says, nope, we build up the defenses, and then we make sure that the Germans attack somewhere else. And when they do it, we attack to the west. And that's exactly what happened, right? They went down into Stalingrad to go on the attack, the Germans, and we know how that turned out, whereas they left Moscow alone because, Zhukov knew they were going to make an attack somewhere else. He wasn't sure if it was Leningrad or Stalingrad, but he had enough soldiers shuffled around to, go anywhere. When they committed to Stalingrad, he sent everybody there. So, again, he's still alive because he had absolutely no political ambitions of any kind. He's an army guy, and that's the end of it. So these two guys actually managed to live arguing with Stalin, not in public, but, behind the scenes. So who's worse? You always hear this thing. Who's worse, Stalin or Hitler? Hitler is a pretty bad guy. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Stalin wasn't exactly a good dude either. Like I said, lots of people to the gulags. Destroyed farming down in the Ukraine to collectivize it all. Didn't like private farming. A lot of people starved to death, caused a famine. That's why communism doesn't work. Anyone wants to argue about it, go ahead. That's your first example. It just doesn't work out too well. And of course, he almost lost the Second World War by actually trusting Hitler. Here we are. Stalin, the guy who trusts nobody, trusts Hitler, the dude you should never trust in any circumstances. It's kind of ironic. Some other people said Stalin's planning on attacking Hitler later on. It's kind of hard to say. They're going to say that after the war, of course. But Stalin was definitely not a fan of democracy, of representative government, or anything else. He's trying to claim to be a communist, fighting for the workers' utopia down the road. But, yeah, it seems a lot like a czar, doesn't he? Yeah, well, he got this right anyway. I'll give him credit for that. When they finally fought the Germans, he fought them and destroyed them and took the Reichstag, and Hitler may or may not have killed himself. So, say what you will about Stalin, he got this right at least, taking down Berlin. So giving credit where credit is due. Stalin was around for a long time, but he wasn't going to be there forever. He dies in 1953. Just kind of had a stroke, and that was the end of that. Again, we're not really sure who the successor is going to be. Yeah, Molotov is supposed to be number 2 guy, but he doesn't really want the job. And there are other people who are lining up for it. We made a really funny movie about this death of Stalin. It's a comedy, a very sick sort of comedy. But, it hit the high points, historically speaking. If you look over there on the left, you got these two guys, the dark-haired dude. That is supposed to be Gregory Malenkov, who was running the Communist Workers' Party in 1953. And then the short, fat guy is Beria, head of the KGB, NKVD at the time. Just calling it KGB. So these are the two contenders. And then over there, see Steve Buscemi, he's going to be Khrushchev. Khrushchev is going to win this thing in the end. Malenkov ran the party, but, he wasn't really popular. A lot of people didn't think he could do the job Stalin did. Beria was another psychotic. They didn't want another Stalin. There were some things in his past there, what he did to some children, lots of children, so that wasn't going to fly. They arrested Beria and shot him, not quite like in the movie, but it did end up the same way. And Malenkov, they just voted him out. So here comes Khrushchev. Khrushchev pulls it off. There we are, Nikita Khrushchev. Malenkov, he didn't get tortured or shot or anything. They just, reassigned him some paper shuffling job, and that was the end of that. Beria, everybody hated him. He was going to get shot. So Khrushchev was kind of Stalin's right-hand man, especially down in Stalingrad during that battle. Anything he needed done, all the dirty work, Nikita Khrushchev was the guy. Stalin died in 53. Nikita Khrushchev is there in 1956. See the gap again? They're running it by committee. So this time you really need to decide who your successor is going to be, just in case something happens to Khrushchev. And Khrushchev never really got around to it. As you can see, he's not going to be there too long. Khrushchev, who was Stalin's right-hand man, actually turned on Stalin after he was dead. And, called him a dictator and all sorts of other bad things, and decided to get rid of the cult of Stalin personality over there. So Nikita Khrushchev came across kind of as a peasant kind of guy. He grew up out on the farm and everything. But he also smart enough to realize that a continued confrontation with the West, capitalist West, wasn't going to benefit anybody. He actually thought maybe peaceful coexistence was a way they can do it. Doesn't mean he's not going to overrun communism one day. He did say, "We will bury you." That's right. See, even Buddy agrees there. But His view was that if we have socialism in one country, everybody sees how great it is and everybody's going to switch over to communism. Didn't quite work out that way. Nikita Khrushchev, also a bit of a hothead. Like the shoe incident. It was at the UN in New York. Allegedly had a shoe and was beating on the table, screaming. It sounds like something he would do. I'm not surprised if he did do it somewhere else. Apparently, he brandished his shoe to make a point and put it down. And then they said he was beating on the table, beating it on the table. Maybe it happened, maybe not. It's kind of exaggerated. Depends who you talk to. It's the Cold War. Everything is blown out of proportion. But this is a guy who's got nuclear weapons at his command, and I'll be honest with you, makes you a little worried. Yep, and then it got even worse. It almost got real there, the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. At the time, nuclear weapons and rockets and missiles and such didn't quite have the range to reach around the world like they do today. I could launch a missile out of North Dakota and it's going to land on the other side of the world in 30 minutes. Back then, didn't quite have the range, so he put it in Cuba. Some Soviet missiles, as you can see. Most of the United States is sitting under the shadow of Soviet missiles. The United States, having missiles Turkey and Italy, decided they didn't really like this, so they put a quarantine around Cuba, avoiding the word blockade because blockade is an act of war. So eventually the Soviet Union had to back down on this thing and made a secret side deal to remove the Jupiter missiles from Italy and Turkey, though they were, obsolete and about to be removed anyway. This embarrassed the Soviet Union on the international stage big time because there's nothing they can do. They don't really have that much of a navy in 1962. If the United States decide to invade Cuba, nothing the Soviet Union can do. We're your ally, but the guarantee is hollow. They had to back down. And it's just as well because either you back down or you fight a nuclear war, and nobody wins a nuclear war, even in the 60s. Had they pressed the buttons, this conversation isn't happening. 1964, Nikita goes on vacation and he gets laid off. Yep. Went down to Crimea, called back to see what's going on. His phones aren't working. He gets arrested down in the Crimea. Not arrested, but detained. And he's no longer General Secretary of the Soviet Union. He was out in 64, and look at this. Two things you just notice. Leonid Brezhnev, 1964. They decided who his successor was going to be. Other thing you should notice, look at those eyebrows. Yeah, those aren't caterpillars, those are eyebrows. I call him Mr. Eyebrow, Leonid Brezhnev. They pick Leonid Brezhnev because, well, he's Leonid Brezhnev. He's not exactly Mr. Excitement. He's a bureaucrat. All right, he sends a few people to Gulag, not quite as many. He's just sort of there. He's as exciting as watching paint dry. This is not a guy who's going to start beating at a desk, beating his shoe against a desk over in New York. He's not one of these guys who makes threats to people. Even in 1973, during the Middle Eastern War, where they said they were thinking about sending soldiers to support Egypt and Syria, he wasn't really serious about that. He actually got along with Nixon at the time. So, like I said, he's a steady guy who's just kind of there. And he's there all the way until 1982. The one mistake he made was invading Afghanistan. After he dies in 1982, we got Yuri Andropov, former head of the KGB. He's there in 1982 and he drops off in 1984. Yes, pun intended. Andropov drops off. He shows up in 82, he gets sick and he dies in 1984. In 1984, Konstantin Chernenko is already sick. Shows up, he dies. What have you noticed here? Yeah, you notice that, oh, great, they found successors. They kind of have to because they're dropping off one behind the other. Yeah, so their system is literally sick and dying. Communism is not working. They can't even have a guy in a general secretary position there long enough to even make an impression. All right, by the time you learn how to spell Chernenko, he's already gone. So clearly they need somebody else. And that new guy, his young strapping grandfather here, Mikhail Gorbachev, shows up in 1985. It's nice to have somebody who wasn't playing for the 1919 Green Bay Packers in Moscow. So he's a little bit of a different communist. He's still committed to communism, but he sees it needs to be reformed. We have perestroika, right, and glasnost. Glasnost opening, perestroika's restructuring. So he's going to change communism so it can actually work. He's there 6 years, so how'd it work out? Yeah, it didn't work. Why? Because it can't work. Communism simply is a system that's unsustainable. It's never worked anywhere. And the Soviet Union was the showcase, and no dice there. December 26, 1991, after the KGB attempted to launch a coup in August to try and throw out Gorbachev. It didn't work. The Russian people rallied around Gorbachev, and it's basically over for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. December 26, 1991, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, as we say in Canada, the Soviet flag comes down for the last time, and up comes the flag of the Republic of Russia. December 26th. They date the Republic of Russia to be January the 1st, 1992, which makes sense. So I'm just kind of wondering what was going on there for a week. Translation, a lot of looting. Right, there's no paperwork, there's nobody to call. I guess they hung on to get the PTO or something there at the end, right? All the Soviet stuff transferred over to Russia. That's just my guess. Now, the Soviet Union, we know where that is. We know where it was, I should say. Well, in the boundaries of the Soviet Union, something else was living there long before anybody could utter USSR, right? It was the woolly mammoth, one of my favorite Ice Age animals, that and the saber-toothed cat. The woolly mammoth is just a majestic beast. It looks like an elephant because it was descended from. Its ancestors came from Africa, came up there through the Middle East, and then its form you're looking at was in Europe, Western Asia, Eastern Asia, across Siberia. It could live in some pretty bad conditions, though they prefer to be just kind of south of the polar regions, living in the steppe country. The woolly mammoth was just everywhere. It'd been around about 2.5 million years before it finally became extinct, somewhere around 10,000 years ago. 10,000 BC or so is when it became extinct. Why did it become extinct? What happened? What always happens? The Homo sapiens showed up. Other people point to climate change and all that kind of thing, and I'm sure it played a role, but yeah, funny how it disappeared at the same time humans show up. Yeah, Europe, Asia, North America. Same place the woolly mammoth was, same place the humans go, and by 10,000 BC, the humans are there and the woolly mammoth isn't. So figure that one out. Oh man, we still find frozen remains of mammoth. We know a lot about the mammoths, and people even sell the ivory tusks that they find out in Siberia. So the woolly mammoth was around very recently. We know exactly what it looks like I said, the frozen remains, the color, how big it is, everything about the woolly mammoth, other than the fact it's not around anymore. But just because it's listed as disappearing in 10,000 BC doesn't always mean that. Now, apparently, we had some dwarf mammoths hanging around on Wrangel Island to about 1700 BC. Yeah, in the historical era. How about that? On Wrangel Island, very far away from everybody. They're called dwarf mammoths because they were smaller. We found the remains. And they were there at the same time the pyramids were being, created. So, yeah, how about that? And nobody really discovered Wrangel Island about the 17th century or so. But, yeah, it's just interesting to see that a form of woolly mammoth was hanging around well into the historical era, or as we like to say, the Holocene. It's a pygmy mammoth because it's a smaller area, there's not as much to eat, so they look like small mammoths. Yep. Still big enough to chase off a polar bear, though. But we see the calf, and it's not going to get much bigger than that. But it gets a little bit bigger, has a tusk, and chase off chase off a polar bear, if nothing else. There's how you compare it to another human being. So it's kind of a pint-sized woolly mammoth. Hung around all the way until 1700 BC. Population wasn't very big. It leads to inbreeding, a lack of genetic diversity, and it just doesn't work out and things start to die out. But it's a shame because even if the pygmy mammoth had survived a little bit longer, or maybe just never went extinct at all, look at that. Would have been cool. You could have been riding, at least Vikings or even the Mongols, could have been riding pygmy mammoths into battle, just like the Carthaginians using elephants, Hannibal and all that. But unfortunately, it wasn't in the cards. There's still reports about people seeing woolly mammoths in Siberia or even Alaska. I like to think it's true. I hope it's true, but I don't know. I haven't seen any convincing evidence. There's a picture a few years ago I just thought about. Supposedly crossing a river in 2011 in Siberia, but that's a bear carrying a fish, It'd be really cool if they did have woolly mammoths, and maybe they're coming back. Uh-huh. Yeah, maybe Pleistocene Park. You heard about this? Two Russian scientists, Zaimonov brothers, they're trying to recreate, since the climate is warming up again, thinking they can recreate a Pleistocene type environment, get the right vegetation and kind of create the steppe country again, let it spread up to the north, same place the mammoths used to be. They can handle polar climates, but they really like the steppe country from what we can tell. And there's also the can we bring the mammoth back? You know, some people say, should we? Can we? Is it a good idea? And then there are other people say there's literally 5 movies that say it's a bad idea to bring back extinct animals. But hey, a woolly mammoth, it's a plant eater, right? So as long as you don't mess with it, it's not going to mess with you. So Pleistocene Park might be happening over there in Cherskili in the Yakutsk autonomous region. It's not that far from Wrangel Island. You notice that? Yeah, ever hear that old saying, things end where they begin? Well, this time it might be starting where it ended almost. You know, reverse. Well, don't you just love the 21st century? So maybe they get a Pleistocene Park megafauna thing going. If they do, hey man, how much are the tickets? I'll be the first guy in line, man. Love nothing more than to see Ice Age life running around. I'm going to stay, though, inside whatever vehicle or fence or barrier. Yeah, I saw Jurassic Park. I know what kind of things can happen. Now, speaking of lunacy, and the Packers are playing the Steelers. Steelers played last Thursday, so they've had a bit of a break over there. Packers and Steelers, this should be an interesting game. They're playing over at Acrisure, so Steelers have the home field advantage. I think we could pull a miracle out. Steelers are 5-3, looking good. Still kind of a young team. Not sure if it's Super Bowl bound yet, but, you know, if they prove me wrong and win the Super Bowl, I'll be happy to admit I'm wrong. No problem. And you know what I'm going to say? It starts with the running game. That's what they did against the Titans, and it worked out. It's going to work out every time. They got Warren there, number 30. He's a good guy. He operates, as you can see, on the outside. On the inside, we got Najee Harris saying bye-bye Cleveland over there. If you can get that running game going, man, you'll just pound the daylights out of Green Bay's front line. You can throw right over them afterwards or just keep running the ball. Because we got more than these two guys at running backs, and they get experience too. If you can run the ball, you're going to win. Now, if you want to start throwing, yes, you can. We have talented receivers. Please use them. The guy over there on the right is Deontay Johnson. Had a fantastic game against Tennessee. Every time he went out there, he caught the ball. It's always several yards downfield. That helps. George Pickens on the other side there on the number 14. He had a rough kind of game there. 2 catches, -1 yard. It was just, you know, even the great ones have a bad day. And then he got mad, went on Instagram screaming, free me, and then he scrubbed it. Okay, and Coach Tomlin got on board with that real quick and ended that before it became a big problem. See, in the 21st century in social media, people start venting when they get angry, and it breaks up team harmony. That's what happened to the Steelers in 2016, a team that was so good I think they could have won the Super Bowl. Instead, they're shouting at each other on social media, and Tomlin did not seem to have any control over the team. Now, in his defense, no one has any control over Antonio Brown. But nonetheless, I think he could have done a better job. We would have had a Super Bowl that year. This time, he got ahead of the story and took care of it. So hopefully he learned something from then. And hopefully George Pickens learned it too. I think he's going to have a breakout game. He's going to have an awesome game because he wants to prove something to somebody, and Green Bay's in the way. Now, wargaming the Packers. The Packers are a lot like the Steelers. They have a pretty good defense, but the offense needs some work. Steeler defense, you know what we need from you. What we always need you to do, right? Stop the other team and score some points. Green Bay is pretty good at stopping people, but they don't pick off the ball and run back to the end zone quite as much as the Steelers do. So hopefully they just remain, you know, there and give up some points, and the Steelers shut them down. Green Bay's got a young quarterback too, just like Kenny Pickett, except this is Jordan Love. He's kind of interception prone. I hope he keeps that up. And we'll see how they play in front of a hostile Acrisure crowd. So I'm thinking the Steelers win this thing, but you never, ever, ever underestimate anybody. Definitely not at this level. So Steelers and Packers toe-to-toe. The Browns are playing the Ravens, so if the Browns actually beat the Ravens, which could happen, and the Steelers beat the Packers, the Steelers are in first place. So, hey, go Steelers, and ironically enough, go Browns. All right, let's take a look at the CFL if we call this a day. We're up there to the finals. We got Montreal versus Toronto in the East. And in the West, it's BC versus Winnipeg. BC means British Columbia, in case you're wondering. Everyone says the home team is going to win, leading to a Grey Cup battle between Toronto and Winnipeg. Rematch from last year. Only one way to find out, my friend. Play the game. It's going to be on Saturday. Give you something to do just before the Steelers go into battle against the Packers. You guys have yourself a fantastic day. Like and subscribe. Don't forget to correct my many, many mistakes down in the comments. I will see you again next Friday when the Steelers are in first place and we got the Grey Cup matchup finally settled. Have a great day. See you later. Das vidanya.